Is Marxism relevant in the 21st century? 1. Many people see the collapse of communism as proof that Marx is not relevant to the world today. After the Soviet Union collapsed and the Berlin Wall came down, Communist China became more open to Western influence, and its economy is more open to free enterprise. People see the failure of communism as the failure of Marx, yet the communism that Marx envisaged has never existed. What the history of the 20th century shows us is the power of Marx's ideas to capture the imaginations of the poor and oppressed throughout the world. There is no doubt that his beliefs or others' interpretations of them changed the history of the world. The relevance of Marx to today's society has been debated and discussed by many philosophers, economists, historians, and other academics, as well as by fervent Marxists, students, and drunken pub philosophers. Almost everyone has an opinion on Marx, even if it is not a particularly informed one. There are three main arguments. 1. Marxism is not relevant today at all, because it was never relevant. His scientific method was flawed, and his economic theory was completely mistaken. 2. Marxism is not relevant today because it was a product of its time. The capitalist society that existed at the time he was writing does not exist anymore. There is no such thing as the proletariat now, so there will be no revolution. We are living in a postmodern world which bears no resemblance to the 19th century. There is no such thing as class. Huge theories of everything are false. Is Marxism relevant in the 21st century? 2. 3. Marxism is still relevant. The failure of communism in some countries does not indicate that Marx was wrong. In fact, he predicted there would be a swing away from his theories and that capitalism would try to fight back before it was finally defeated. The world may have changed, but while the economy is a capitalist one, his theories are still relevant. Postmodern culture is part of the hegemony and an attempt to make people passive, interested in celebrity but not analyzing anything. The first theory is obviously wrong, because even if Marx was totally mistaken about everything, many people have acted upon what he said, so it must have some relevance. There are still many millions of people living in communist countries despite the fall of communism. Derrida wrote, in Spectres of Marx, that we can never be free of the past or our interpretations of it, so that Marxism is now a part of our consciousness. Even though Derrida did not agree with the historical materialism of Marxism, he saw that there was still injustice and poverty caused by economic oppression. Marx was the person who brought this to our attention, and the problem hasn't gone away. The debate about the validity of Marx's methods does not solve anything. The second and third theories can both be seen to be correct to some extent because of the sheer volume of work that Marx produced. It depends on which aspects of his work are being examined. Is Marxism relevant in the 21st century? 3. His scientific method of studying history has been accused as not being scientific by modern standards. Karl Popper, a 20th century philosopher, believes that there is no real way of proving whether Marx's assertions are true or false as you could in a proper scientific study. However, Marx did amass and classify a great deal of evidence about past societies, and modern social science developed out of his techniques. He wrote and researched in a very structured way that attempted to use the scientific methods of his time, which were concerned with the classification of things. Marx was not a trained economist. Some of his predictions about the economy have proved to be false. For example, wages being pushed down to subsistence level. On the contrary, most people are better off in real terms than they were 100 years ago. Other assertions have been correct. He predicted that large corporations would come to dominate world markets. At the end of the 20th century, more and more companies merged into large conglomerates, including banks, publishers, and computer software companies. In the 21st century, the trend continues, with large supermarket chains taking each other over, buying up properties and forcing small shops out of business. Marx also predicted that industry would become more and more reliant on technology and that there would be periodic recessions. Both of these predictions are correct. Is Marxism relevant in the 21st century? 4. Society has changed for the better. In the Western world, many inequalities have disappeared. Universal suffrage has changed the structure of society since Marx's time. In Britain, we have free education up to university level and health services for all who need them, although many would see this as a two-tier system where the rich can afford to pay for better private treatment and education. However, it is still a great improvement on the Victorian era, and the lives and health of most people in Britain are better as a result. The feudal House of Lords has been reformed. Heredity is no longer the only criterion for belonging to this law-making body. Marxists would argue that the scandal over cash for honors shows that merely reforming a law is not enough to change a political system. Although the proletariat, as Marx described it, does not exist in the same way today, people still refer to themselves as wage slaves and work hard to pay off debts to credit card companies. Debt is becoming a major problem in Britain as many people get caught up in the consumerist society. As Marx predicted, there is also still a huge underclass of the homeless and the unemployed. Is Marxism relevant in the 21st century? 5. Marx is much more relevant to today's world when we look at his philosophy. There are two main philosophical points to be considered. 1. Human nature is not a fixed thing, but alters with social and economic conditions. This means that society can be changed by altering the economic system. Nobody was aware of this before Marx brought it to our attention. However, the history of the 20th century has shown that it is not as easy as Marx believed to create the society of equals that he thought could develop. The fact that communist states have been riddled with inequalities does not mean that Marx was entirely wrong, but perhaps he was more optimistic about the flexibility of human nature than most people. 2. The most important part of Marx's philosophy was the understanding he gave us about the nature of freedom. Under capitalism, we appear to be free, but because economic conditions control our work, religion, politics, and ideas, we cannot control our lives or society. Depression is one of the top 3 causes of absence from work in the United Kingdom. Could this be a sign of alienation? Of course, this is a supposition which is not easily proved, but according to surveys carried out by NOP in 2006, just 36% of British people now feel very happy. In 1957, the figure was 52%. People are less happy than they were 50 years ago, despite an increase in material possessions. The fact that we even acknowledge the possibility of this alienation is because Marx introduced the idea. People are now much more aware of the social and economic influences which shape their lives, and this is due in part to Marx, who first brought it to our attention. Is Marxism relevant in the 21st century? 6. The world developed in ways that Marx could not have predicted in just 100 years. In the early 1980s, few people could foresee the phenomenal rise of the power of home computers, mobile phones, the Internet, the extent to which technological advances would change aspects of our society in a short space of time. There are signs within the music industry and publishing that people are taking the means of production into their own hands. Technology in the Western world means we can all record our own music and make our own books. This will affect the structure of society yet again in ways we cannot be sure of right now. There is also a growing movement against globalization of industry and exploitation of workers in countries in the Third World. Capitalism has been accused of chasing poverty around the world. As soon as workers in one country receive fair pay and rights, then the products become too expensive, and so production is moved to another area of the world. At present, in the UK, we are buying in many manufactured goods from China and Laos. This means that the proletariat exists outside our culture and society and become almost invisible. Many Marxists are a part of the campaign against globalization, which also includes religious and ecological groups. It is not clear how this will affect society in the long term. To try to look at the development of Marxism over the next 100 years would be an exercise in science fiction. We cannot predict how technology will change our society. Perhaps work will cease to exist as a result of technological advances. Perhaps society will be destroyed by some disaster, and we will return to primitive communism. The revolution Marx predicted never took place, but does that mean it will never happen? Marxists would argue that as long as 10% of the population hold 99% of the wealth, then there is no equality. There are still numerous Marxist groups in the world who believe that as long as society remains dominated by capitalism, there must be a revolution. As long as the ideas of Marx are still alive in the minds of people throughout the world, this must be a possibility.